I had this bad habit of always working on a project and not taking any time just to enjoy the day. So I decided that I was going to go out and go for a drive, just get out of the house. And I had looked at Gaia GPS and I had found some unmaintained roads that weren't that far from me. So I figured I'd go check the roads out, and I figured I'd take my new Explorer Bear 12 volt cooler with me in my fridge just to test it and see how it worked, in the hot Texas sun. So even on my day off, I was still kind of working on a project on the side. But what I wasn't expecting was an adventure. And that's kind of what this turned into. Well, it is what it turned into. The area you see here was once the Red River Station. Here, the river makes a distinct bend to the north, and it pushes the current to the south bank, which makes a favorable river crossing. The crossing had been used by buffaloes and Native Americans long before Red River Station was ever here. During the Civil War, Texas wasn't able to move their cattle north to market, but that didn't keep the cattle from having calves. When the Civil War ended in 1865, Texas ranchers had a surplus of some 5 million cattle. With such an abundance, they were only worth $3 or $4 a head. But for the north and east, those cattle could go for $30 to $40 a head. Many of the cattlemen were cattle rich, but cash poor. The trouble was getting the cattle to market in the north. In the spring of 1866, about 250,000 cattle moved out of Texas through Oklahoma and Arkansas, headed to Sedalia, Missouri, which was the closest railroad. Farmers in Missouri and Kansas stopped allowing Texas cattle to move north across the land because the Texas cattle had a disease known as splenic fever or Texas fever. The disease was spread by ticks attached to the Texas cattle that killed thousands of domestic cattle in the north. Texas Longhorn cattle had thick hides and could resist many infectious diseases that would kill other breeds of cattle. Armed men would turn back herds of Texas cattle and not let them pass. This armed resistance and the quarantine law passed by Missouri legislature in 1866 made it impossible for Texas ranchers to get their cattle to the north. Kansas had their own quarantine line and only allowed Texas cattle to the south and west of what is now McPherson, Kansas. Joseph McCoy, seeing an opportunity, left a prosperous farm in Illinois in 1867 and went to Abilene, Kansas along the new Kansas Pacific Railway, where he worked out a deal with the railroad to haul Texas cattle back east. McCoy also had to negotiate an agreement with the local farmers and convince Samuel Crawford, the governor of Kansas, to allow Texas cattle within the quarantine lines. McCoy built loading pens and sent men to Texas to locate herds and guide them to Abilene. Colonel O.W. Wheeler was one of the first to make the journey in 1867, leading about 2,400 cattle from San Antonio to Abilene. When Wheeler and his men reached the North Canadian River in Indian Territory, now Oklahoma, they saw wagon tracks and chose to follow them. Those tracks were the wagon trail made by Jesse Chisholm. The cattle trail from Red River Station to Kansas was known as the Abilene Trail, but some cowboys called it the Chisholm Trail as it met with a more established trail at the Canadian River by Jesse Chisholm's store. Jesse Chisholm was a Scott Cherokee fur trader, merchant, and an adopted member of the Wichita Indians. Chisholm traveled between his trading post at the mouth of the Little Arkansas River, now Wichita, Kansas, south to his trading post at Council Grove along the North Canadian River, just west of what is now Oklahoma City. Chisholm would travel further south to Wichita Agency near Anadarko, Oklahoma, and trade there as well. This trading route between Wichita Agency and Wichita, Kansas became known as Chisholm's Trail. Although it was initially called the Abilene Trail, it didn't always go to Abilene. In 1872, due to an increase in domestic livestock deaths related to Texas fever and an ever-growing problem with unlawful cowboys, Abilene passed an ordinance prohibiting Texas Longhorns, making it necessary for ranchers to find new railheads to ship their cattle from. The Texas feeder trails heading to Red River Station in Texas didn't have names, and the trail to Kansas began shifting as ranchers found new railheads to ship from. Over time, the whole trail system, including those in Texas heading for the Chisholm's Trail, became known as Chisholm Trail. Jesse Chisholm died of food poisoning in 1868 and would never see what his trail had become. Ranchers all over Texas would drive their cattle to Red River Station, where they would cross the Red River and follow the Abilene Trail to the railroad in Kansas. In a letter from June 1873, cowboy J.V. Shiner wrote that his outfit had been encamped here for 5 days, waiting for the Red River to fall. It has been consistently raining for 8 to 10 days, and the river has been very high. It is estimated that there are about 30,000 cattle in this vicinity waiting to cross the Red River. This area was settled between 1857 and 1860. The area really boomed when drovers started bringing cattle here in 1867 to cross the Red River on their way to Kansas. The town, originally named after Salt Creek that it sits next to, had a post office, 2-story hotel, saloon, trading post, mercantile, several blacksmiths, and leather repair shops. There was even a company of Texas Rangers stationed here. The name was changed to Red River Station in 1884. Typically, a herd would consist of 2,500 cattle, a dozen cowboys, extra horses, and a chuck wagon for food and gear. On the trail, the cattle watered in the morning, and then they slowly ate their way northward. The cowboys kept them from stopping, turning back, or leaving the herd. The herd would walk about 10 miles a day, stopping only to water and eat. At night, the herd would stop at a watering hole and bed down. It took cattle leaving the southern part of the state 6 weeks to 2 months to cross Texas and get to the Red River Station. Then it would take another 4 weeks or more to move the herd across Indian Territory into Kansas. At the Abilene Railhead, or whatever railhead replaced the Abilene Railhead later, the trail boss would sell the cattle and horses, pay the cowboys, and return to Texas with the money for the owner, often repeating the trip year after year. Quarantine laws and landowners putting up barbed wire fences put an end to the cattle drives up the Abilene Trail. In 1875, a new western trail opened up about 90 miles west of here, and cattle now crossed the Red River at Doan's Crossing on their way to Dodge City, Kansas. That trail was used until 1884. From 1875 until 1880, the Chisholm Trail became a feeder route into the Western Trail. It is estimated that 10 million Longhorns went up the Chisholm Trail and the Western Trail before new rail lines to Texas made the long trail drive no longer necessary. 10 million head of cattle at $40 a head would be $400 million, or $8.68 billion today with inflation. That really shows how significant these cattle trails were to the Texas economy. It also shows you how significant this empty piece of land was to the Texas economy, and how instrumental this piece of land was to Texas in general. When the Gainesville, Henrietta, and Western Railway crossed northern Montague County, it bypassed Red River Station and was about 5 miles south where Belcherville and Nocona are now. With the influx of cattlemen gone and new towns springing up along the railroad, the population of Red River Station dwindled. A tornado struck Red River Station in the late 1880s, destroying much of the community. Rather than rebuild, citizens moved south to the communities along the new rail line, and Red River Station again became farmland. In 1887, the post office closed, and the community ceased to exist. The only thing left here is the Red River Station Cemetery, a monument along the tree line, and a Chisholm Trail marker. The area between this fence line and the tree line on the other side of the field, which is Salt Creek, is where the cattle trail was. And the cattle would have traveled in this direction heading up to the river. Now, right in about here is where the blacksmith shops would have been. There were some residences here. And then off to the left would have been a saloon. Here on this side of the road was a mercantile. Not really sure where the post office was. There were more buildings over in this area. And then right about here, right in this general area right here, was a 2-story hotel. The Red River Cemetery is straight up this fence line. You go about 1,200 feet, about 300 feet past where the tree starts, and then it's up off on the left. A half mile down this road, the road will bend and go to the left. Right before that bend is the Chisholm Trail marker, and there'll be a little drive to the right, a little trail, and that trail will take you back to where the monument is. The monument is in the area where the trail used to actually cross the Red River. Now, at the end of this road that we're on right now, once you get to that curve, it's only about another 1,300 feet before you get to the edge of the river. The river curved. The river doesn't curve as much now as it did then, but at the point where the monument is, the river was only about another 500 to 700 feet from that point to the edge of the river. Not only was there an area here where the cattle crossed the river, but there was also a cable ferry here that would take people and goods across the river. I got conflicting information about where it was. Some places, some maps say that it was down near the bend in the road here, and another map I looked at indicated that it was closer to where the cattle crossing was. So I don't know. I just know somewhere between this bend and from where this monument is that you're going to see there was a cable ferry to take people and goods across the river. Update. At the corner down here, the road would have went diagonal up to the right, crossed the river, made a left a short distance, and then went diagonal towards the left up to Fleetwood, Oklahoma. And there you can see the white concrete Chisholm Trail marker. Now this area right here is private property, so you need to make sure that you're respectful of the property. Stay out of that field that you can see that's plowed up there on the right. People do come back here and look at this monument from time to time. This is actually my second time coming back to see this monument. I saw the monument, I don't know, maybe 2 years ago. And at the time, there were some people working in the field. They kind of looked at me for a minute, realized I was just going to look at the monument, and then they just kind of ignored me. So, but you have to understand that, driving along somebody's field like this to go look at something, you might get a little bit of attention. So, just be mindful. And the monument's going to be right around this little bend here, and it's kind of tucked in with the trees, and it's fenced in. Now, this is Texas, so don't get caught up in the moment and forget where you're at, okay? There are rattlesnakes here, and there are copperhead snakes, and both of them can kill you. So watch where you step. This monument reads, Red River Station, jumping off point on the famous Chisholm Cattle Trail, 1867 to 1887. Red River Station was a main crossing and last place on the trail to buy supplies until Abilene, Kansas, 350 miles to the north. During the cattle drive era of Western history, millions of animals swam the turbulent river here en route to Kansas railhead and markets. An abrupt bend in the river checked its flow on this point, creating a natural crossing which had been used for years by buffalo and Indians. Even so, the water was wild, swift, and sometimes clogged with sandbars. Frequently, cattle were so jammed cowboys could walk across their backs. Besides a cattle crossing, the station was an outpost of the Frontier Regiment, which patrolled Texas's northernmost border during Confederacy. During cattle era, a town began here, its ferry serving drovers, soldiers, freighters, and settlers returning from Indian captivity. Local cemetery 1 mile southeast contains many graves of these Texas pioneers. So now that you've seen Red River Station, or the area where Red River Station once was, and you got basic information about the cattle trails and the Chisholm Trail, let's head over to Spanish Fort, which is neither Spanish and not a fort. But it was significant, and I'll explain that to you when we get there. Welcome to Spanish Fort. It was neither Spanish nor a fort. The Toivaya Indians built a settlement here between 1750 and 1757. In 1759, Colonel Diego Parrilla of Spain oversaw a campaign to expel the Toivaya and Comanche Indians from the area. The Toivaya town had an estimated population of 6,000 and was fortified with entrenchments and wooden stockades. When several hundred Spanish soldiers arrived, 4 hours of fighting ended with the Spanish retreating. They even abandoned their 2 cannons and baggage train. Smallpox epidemics that started in 1778 and American expansion following the Louisiana Purchase in 1803 destroyed the population. The Toivaya abandoned the area around 1841, allowing it to deteriorate. The Toivaya had long since left, so an early white settler who visited the ruins in 1859 didn't know anything about the area and its history and imagined it had been a former Spanish fort. By the early 1870s, a town called Burlington had developed here. It served as a watering hole for cattle drivers headed for the Chisholm Trail. Stockmen on the trail bedded their herds at Red River Station, then rode to here for supplies and entertainment. The town grew quickly, and local citizens applied for post office in 1876, but postal authorities rejected their request because another post office in Texas had the same name. So, the citizens renamed it in honor of who they thought had lived here previously, Spanish Fort. At its peak, the town had numerous businesses and churches, a Masonic lodge, 5 physicians, 4 hotels, and several saloons. The most popular of which was J.W. Schrock's Cowboy Saloon, where cattlemen collected to drink and swap stories. On the town square, Herman J. Justin founded the boot company, which later grew into Justin Industries, or Justin Boots. Justin took orders from the drovers going north and had their custom boots ready in time for them to pick up on their way back south. In 1885, there were 300 residents, but Spanish Fort gained a reputation as a nasty town. Later, Justin's wife claimed that during the height of the cattle industry, there had been over 40 killings. In fact, on one Christmas morning, 3 men had been murdered before breakfast. Outlaws hiding in Indian territory traveled across the Red River to Spanish Fort to get supplies, frequently starting a phrase that further troubled the town. Spanish Fort was doing very well until the railroad came through in the late 1880s. A new town, Nocona, was plotted about 15 miles south, and Spanish Fort began losing population to this new town. Spanish Fort rebounded in the 1920s. However, when oil exploration made its way to the fields outside of town, the brief boom that ensued helped to fund a new brick schoolhouse in 1924. But a major explosion in a nearby well and several dry wells hurt Spanish Fort's viability. By the late 1960s, Spanish Fort began to shrink until it became a ghost town of what it once was. As far as Justin Boots, after the railroad came through and Nocona became a town, Justin Boots moved their operation there. After H.J. Justin passed in 1918, his 3 sons took over the business and moved headquarters to Fort Worth. Enid, H.J. Justin's daughter, thinking that her father would have wanted the company to stay in Nocona, created the Nocona Boot Company. Nocona Boots became popular, and business boomed so much that in June 1981, Justin Industries acquired all of Nocona Boot Company's outstanding stock, and in 1999, the Nocona plant was shut down and production moved to El Paso. Today, the old Nocona Boot Factory is now the Nocona Beer Brewery, but it still has the Nocona Boot Company neon sign on the front of it. And the old Justin Boot Factory is now the Nocona City Hall and Justin Community Center. Next stop, a saloon that was built in 1873 and served the cowboys heading for the Chisholm Trail. cattle trail to Red River Station passed here through St. Joe. In 1873, the Stonewall Saloon was built to accommodate the cowboys moving herds up the trail or stopping to rest on their way back from Kansas. The saloon even had a boarding house upstairs. Today, the saloon is a museum preserving the cattle trail's history. You'll also find a Chisholm Trail marker here on the square by the gazebo and a restaurant named Jesse Chisholm's Chuck Wagon Restaurant. I understand using the name in the spirit of the Chisholm Trail, but find it a little ironic that the restaurant is named after a man that died of food poisoning. There's actually a small venue here named Red River Station that hosts concerts on the weekends and serves barbecue on those days. This is off topic, but there's also a pretty awesome military museum here as well that's only open on the weekends. The Red River. This adventure would not be complete without actually going down to the Red River and seeing firsthand what it might have looked like when these drovers were driving cattle across the Red River headed north towards Kansas. If you watch this long, then I have a bonus for you. In 1894, four men robbed the First National Bank in Bowie, Texas, and got away with $18,000 cash and $10,000 in $20 gold pieces. The men fled north towards Indian country, stopping to camp at the edge of the Red River. In the morning, they woke to find a posse approaching them from the south and crossed the river only to be met and arrested by Deputy U.S. Marshal Louis Palmore and his posse. When arrested, the marshal found $18,000 in cash in their saddlebags, but there was no gold. The outlaws were taken to Fort Smith, Arkansas, and sentenced to hang. On the day of this hanging, one of the outlaws told Marshal Palmore that they had buried the gold coins in the area where they had been camping, but the gold was never found. Today, that gold would be worth $21.6 million. The gold is believed to have been buried between the mouth of the Little Wichita River and where the US 81 bridge crosses now, which is an area 7 to 10 miles west of Red River Station. Thanks for watching. For more information or to see the map and GPS tracks of my adventure, visit the link in the description.